What do you think Vlad's gonna be talking about tonight? I mean, he just had us, drink a whole bunch of vodka and weird snacks from over in Russia. And us watching these weird videos. I don't know, he said something about, tall tales and twisted legends. Oh, it's gonna be one of those episodes. Well, that's Madonna. And here's Vlad.
Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, it has arrived. Come to the dark circus. The circus where clowns never smile. Your darkest nightmares will come to life. You'll have an everlasting experience of horror, fear, and evil. Step inside and understand the spooks gone insanely frightening.
Welcome to another episode of Chats with Vlad. Episode 51. Yes. Twisted Tales, Volume 1. Russia. Indeed, boys and girls. There's so many things we could be talking about right now, especially political things. I hear that the Dems didn't get the outcry when they tried fake arresting Trump that they wanted. They wanted people to act violent, but they didn't. They acted how they should. I just wanted to touch on that. Didn't want you to think Uncle Vlad was getting soft on you politically, boys and girls. No, but we have other things. Yes, indeed, we have other things that I wish to talk about tonight, boys and girls. Indeed. As promised, I have some twisted tales for you. These hail from Russia. And since we're in the Russian spirit tonight, the jokes are gonna be Russian too. But first, let me tell you about something. There's an experiment that they did in Russia in the late 1940s. You see, some research teams kept 5 men awake for 15 days using an experimental gas. A gas-based experiment, I should say. But then, you tell me, boys and girls. I have something to show you, boys and girls. Indeed, indeed I do. They say that a picture is worth 1,000 words. So with that being the spirit, you see, boys and girls, indeed, there's actual video taken of some of the experiment. But this was before they had CCTV. But the shape with those poor miscreants. Indeed. Indeed. Let me explain in a little bit clearer detail. You see, well, 5 days went well. Promises of freedom were made. You see, the prisoners were all political. This was during World War II, boys and girls. And these were war prisoners and political prisoners. And freedom is tempting to most of us. Anyway, I digress. After 5 days, darker conversations ensued and darker frames of mind. They started talking about what had landed them in there and about bad experiences from their past traumatic experiences. But then, after a couple of days after that, that's when they quit talking to one another. They started whispering through the portholes. You see, as I alluded to earlier, this was before closed caption TV. So they had 5-inch thick glass portholes they were observing through in audio recordings. Now they did video some of this, but it was a more manual type of video recording, boys and girls. After 9 days, the screaming started. One guy screamed for 3 hours straight until finally they believed that he'd ripped his very vocal cords and all they could hear was a squeak from him. And then after that, another one started screaming. You see, the whole time they were pumping in this, well, a stimulant gas, we'll call it. And they were also pumping in a lot of oxygen. And they were making sure those oxygen levels were always at appropriate levels, always being monitored, boys and girls. After 12 days, the screaming stopped entirely. All sounds stopped. Needless to say, the scientists and researchers started becoming worried because 5 human beings, they would make some kind of sound. They'd left them with enough food for 30 days, but there weren't any toiletries. And some of the guys had started slapping toilet paper type, or actually they didn't even have toilet paper. I think it was papers with shit from books, pages they had ripped out. And they started pasting them over the portholes, so they couldn't even see anything in their boys and girls. They didn't know what was going on. After 14 days, worried scientists offered one person freedom immediately if the subject complied, and let them know. You see, they had not used audio before day 14, but they felt there was a dire need to break protocol, boys and girls. Let's make sure somebody was alive. Only one voice answered back, boys and girls. It was calm and clear, but almost non-human. And it said, "We no longer want to be free." On the 15th day, boys and girls, the door was opened, but only 4 of the test subjects remained. You see, after day 5, they'd quit eating the rations that they'd had, and they'd had enough for 30 days. The experiment only made it halfway. Subjects never slept, but with paranoid delusions, schizophrenic episodes, and many other mental health issues, boys and girls, they had to cut short. They tried pulling them out of the room, and they attacked him. One Russian soldier had his throat ripped out, and the other one was in serious critical condition after one of the test subjects literally removed his entire genitalia. Balls and all, baby. So, after they had to tape down another 2, there was only 2 test subjects that were left. The non-vocal one who had ripped his cords, and one of the vocal ones. The vocal one kept begging for more gas. More gas was all they needed. They cried. The other one, the non-vocal one, had ripped out his guts, and they did a surgery. He begged them for no anesthetic, and they actually managed to put his intestines back in, I believe, boys and girls. The commander was unsure of what the hell any of this meant or what the results were. He wanted to put the 2 test subjects back in, and the test subjects, they wanted to go back in. They wanted more gas, boys and girls, and they didn't want to go to sleep. You see, boys and girls, going to sleep to them was a bad, bad thing indeed. Well, one of the researchers grabbed a gun real quick from one of the soldiers and shot the commanding officer dead square in his forehead. He turned around to the vocal test subject and he pointed the gun at it. And he said, boys and girls, "What the hell are you?" Smiling, it said to the researcher, "Have you forgotten so easily? We are you. We are the madness that lurks within you all, begging to be freed every moment in your animal minds. We are what you hide from in your beds. We are the darkness. We are your insanity." Now that is as twisted tale as you can get. If you're curious, the researcher shot the last test subject and said he'd be damned to hell before he was trapped inside there with those creatures. He wasn't sure what they were, boys and girls, but he did say he didn't think they were any longer human. On to our next twisted Russian tale. This is one of a man called Vlad, like Uncle Vlad. Indeed, his name was Vladimir Kovalinsky. He was 21, and he was a junior officer, August 3rd, 1915. This time, we're talking World War I, boys and girls. You see, the Russians were holding a Polish fortress called Auschwitz. It was on some good ground, surrounded by dark, swampy forest everywhere. There's about 900 Russians inside this fortress holding it down. And there's about 7,000 Germans in dozens and dozens of trenches surrounding the place. You see, they were at a standstill. The Germans couldn't get to the Russians, but the Russians couldn't get to the Germans because of the trenches. So they'd gone to a standstill, to the point where even some of the Russian soldiers would sneak out late at night to catch fish to eat. But Vladimir there, he noticed that the Germans, kept looking down at the ground and then up at the sky, and they were doing something with their hands. These were a bunch of high-ranking officers doing this, not low-level grunts, boys and girls. Vlad was concerned, but he was still a very green officer, and he didn't want the other officers to think he was paranoid, so he didn't say anything. 3 days later, August 6th, 4 a.m., Russian soldiers noticed hot, wavy fumes coming from the ground, but it was 4 in the morning and cold where they were, boys and girls. And all of a sudden, Russian soldiers started getting sick. They started bleeding from their eyes, from their noses, from their ears, puking up chunks of lung, boys and girls. Vladimir knew they were slowly being poisoned. Indeed. The Germans started attacking, thinking that everyone was dead, and Vladimir, knowing that they were all dead anyway, he rallied his troops, and they gathered their guns and their bayonets, and they charged. And what the Germans saw horrified them. What they saw were zombie-like Russian soldiers with their bayonets down, firing, spitting up blood and organs, and shambling towards them. They were so horrified they started running. And that's when the Russians started firing, boys and girls. You see, the amazing part of this story was the Russians were actually outnumbered 70-1. So then, every time they tried running for the trenches, the Russians would fire on them, but a couple of the soldiers made it to the trenches and told about how the zombie Russian army was coming to get them, and that it didn't matter if you fired upon them, they were already dead. It didn't do any good. They ended up making it back to the trenches, a lot of the Germans, and they wouldn't go forward. And Vladimir knew that they were all dying, him and his soldiers. So they did the only thing they could. They destroyed the base, boys and girls. When the Germans got up there, they found everything destroyed. It was no longer good for a fortification. I hear to this day, boys and girls, they still tell tales of Vladimir's bravery, and they still sing songs about his heroic deeds. All hail Vlad. But then, I think I owe you guys a little bit of funny ha-ha. Now don't I? Yes, indeed. How does every Russian joke start? By looking over your shoulder, boys and girls. What's 150 yards long and eats potatoes? A grocery line in Moscow waiting to buy meat. Where do Russians get milk? Why, from Moscows. What do you call a gassy Russian leader? Vladimir Putin. What did Russian people use before candles? Electricity. What's a Russian's favorite dessert? Rice Putin. What does a Russian bride get on her wedding night that's long and hard? A new last name. Why wasn't Jesus born in Russia, boys and girls? Because God couldn't find 3 wise men or a virgin in Russia. Ah, indeed. Indeed. Well, boys and girls, this is Vlad the Inhaler saying you have a lot to think about. Think about it.
Hey,